The wooden cross around Emma's neck felt heavier than chains. Her stepfather's calloused hand shoved her forward, right toward the bearded giant waiting beside the dusty trading post. 16, her stepfather announced, his voice thick with whiskey and desperation. Pure as mountain snow, and strong enough for work. Emma's fingers found the small, carved cross. Her dying mother had pressed it into her palm 3 winters ago. It was all she had left. The scarred mountain man studied her. His eyes were the color of storm clouds. A jagged line ran from his temple to his jaw, a white road map of old violence. His massive frame cast a shadow that seemed to swallow the afternoon sun, and just behind him 4 small children stood watching. Their faces were pinched with hunger and something deeper, something Emma recognized instantly: abandonment. $40, the mountain man said. His voice was quiet, a low rumble like distant thunder. He never took his gaze from Emma's trembling form. She clutched the cross tighter. Its worn edges bit into her palm. Her stepfather's greedy smile stretched wide as he snatched the coins from the giant's hand. The metallic clink sealed her fate like the closing of a coffin lid. Her last connection to family disappeared into a stained pocket. The mountain man stepped forward. Emma flinched, expecting roughness, a hand like her stepfather's. But his touch on her elbow was surprisingly gentle. He guided her toward a waiting wagon where the 4 children sat, silent as gravestones. Their eyes reflected a weariness that matched the ache building in her chest. "Name's Jacob," he said simply, helping her onto the wagon seat. His scarred hands were careful not to linger. "Emma," she whispered, her lips numb with shock and fear. The wagon lurched forward. It carried her away from everything she'd ever known, toward a mountain that loomed like a sleeping giant against the sky. Emma pressed the wooden cross against her heart and wondered if her mother's prayers could reach her out here, in whatever wilderness awaited. The trading post grew smaller behind them, and with it, her entire childhood. Ahead lay only questions and the steady, quiet breathing of the man whose $40 purchase had just changed the course of her life forever. The mountain trail wound upward like a serpent's spine. Each turn revealed vistas that should have taken Emma's breath away, but fear had stolen her ability to appreciate beauty. In the back of the wagon, Jacob's 4 children remained as silent as stones. The oldest, a girl with Jacob's same storm-gray eyes, finally spoke when they paused to rest the horses beside a rushing creek. Her voice carried the weight of a life lived too fast. "I'm Sarah," she said, pointing to each child in turn. "These are my brothers, Tom and little Ben, and that's our sister, Mary." Emma noticed how they all kept a careful distance. They wore the same guarded expression, the kind that suggested a long history of disappointments. Jacob watered the horses. Emma sat awkwardly on a fallen log, the wooden cross warm against her skin. Young Mary, maybe 7 years old, approached with hesitant steps. Her tangled blonde hair caught the sunlight like spun gold. "Are you going to be our new mama?" Mary whispered. Emma's heart clenched at the raw hope flickering in the child's blue eyes. But before she could answer, Sarah quickly pulled her sister back. "Don't get attached, Mary," Sarah said, her voice sharp. "You know what happens when we get attached." The words hit Emma like a physical blow. They revealed a history of loss that explained everything: the silence, the distance, the guarded faces. She found herself reaching for the cross just as Jacob returned, his face as unreadable as granite. He lifted Mary into the wagon with a practiced ease that broke Emma's heart. "How long since their mother?" Emma asked quietly. Jacob's jaw tightened. The scar on his cheek seemed to pulse with old pain. 3 years, he cut her off, climbing onto the wagon seat beside her. The horses resumed their steady climb. Emma watched Jacob's hands. Despite their size and obvious strength, they held the reins with a surprising gentleness. the same careful control he'd shown when helping her into the wagon. She wondered what kind of tragedies had taught this mountain of a man to move through the world with such measured restraint. As afternoon shadows lengthened and the air grew thin with altitude, Emma caught glimpses of Jacob stealing glances at her. His expression was unreadable, but somehow less harsh than it had been at the trading post. But the children remained quiet as ghosts. Their silence spoke volumes about the broken promises they'd already endured in their short lives. What exactly had happened when they got attached? When they finally crested a ridge, Emma saw it, a small cabin nestled in a valley below. Smoke rose from its chimney like a promise of warmth. She pressed the wooden cross to her lips one more time and whispered a prayer that whatever awaited her in that distant home might somehow heal the broken hearts she was now meant to tend. The cabin squatted against the mountainside like something that had grown from the earth itself. Its log walls were weathered a silver gray, its windows glowing amber in the gathering dusk. Emma's stomach churned with a mixture of exhaustion and terror. Jacob helped her down from the wagon with that same careful gentleness he'd shown all day. Inside, the single large room held the essence of masculine survival. Rough-hewn furniture, practical shelves lined with supplies, and a massive stone fireplace that dominated one wall like the heart of the home. But what struck Emma most was the absence of softness, the complete lack of any feminine touch. It was a home that screamed of how thoroughly these children had been motherless. Sarah immediately began preparing supper with the efficiency of someone far older than her, 12 years. The boys carried Emma's single carpet bag to a corner where a narrow cot had been set up. Emma realized it with a jolt of relief and confusion. Jacob had prepared separate sleeping arrangements. He had purchased her as his bride, but he wasn't treating her like one. "You'll sleep there," Jacob said, pointing to the cot. He avoided her eyes, his voice gruff but not unkind. "The children and I share the main bed. Until we figure things out." Emma's fingers found the wooden cross again. She was grateful for this unexpected mercy, even as she wondered what "figuring things out" might mean. Little Mary appeared at her side, tugging on her worn skirt with tiny fingers. "Will you tell us a story?" she whispered with such naked hope that Emma's heart nearly broke. Sarah shot her sister a warning look from across the room, a look that clearly said, "Don't expect too much." They gathered around the rough wooden table for a simple meal of cornbread and beans. Emma noticed how the children ate with careful precision, wasting nothing, savoring every bite. She began to understand the depth of hardship that had shaped their young lives long before she arrived. Jacob blessed the food in a voice that trembled slightly when he added, "And for bringing Emma safely to our home." She looked up to find him watching her, his expression a complicated mix of gratitude and something deeper she couldn't name. The wooden cross seemed to warm against her chest as she helped Sarah clear the dishes, their hands brushing briefly over a tin plate. And for the first time since leaving the trading post, Emma felt a flicker of something that might, eventually, grow into a sense of belonging. When darkness finally claimed the valley and the children settled into their bedrolls with whispered goodnights, Emma lay on her narrow cot. She listened to Jacob's steady breathing from across the room, a sound that was both intimidating and strangely comforting. And she wondered if the gentle giant who'd bought her freedom might somehow also become the answer to prayers she'd been too afraid to pray. Dawn arrived with the sharp crack of an axe biting into logs. The rhythmic thunking pulled Emma from fitful dreams, dreams where her stepfather's drunken laughter chased her down endless dark corridors. She dressed quickly in the gray light filtering through the small windows, her fingers automatically checking for the wooden cross. Then she stepped outside. Jacob was stripped to the waist despite the morning chill, and his back was a map of old violence that made her breath catch in her throat. There were parallel lines, faded but unmistakable, that could only have come from a whip. A dozen small round scars that spoke of burns, and one long puckered mark across his shoulder blade that looked like a knife wound that had healed poorly. He heard her step and turned quickly, reaching for his shirt. His movements weren't about modesty. They were about shame. But it was too late. Emma had already seen how the jagged scar on his face continued down his neck, disappearing beneath the fabric of his collar. It was a testament to whatever hell had forged this gentle giant from raw brutality. "Didn't mean to wake you," he said, his voice rough with embarrassment as he pulled the shirt over his head. Emma felt the wooden cross pulse against her chest, like a second heartbeat. It was a reminder that sometimes the most wounded souls carried the deepest capacity for kindness. Inside, she found Sarah already tending the fire, preparing breakfast with a mechanical efficiency that spoke of too much responsibility on too young shoulders. The boys were helping little Mary dress in clothes that had been mended so many times. The original fabric was barely visible beneath layers of careful patches. "Papa doesn't like people seeing his back," Mary whispered when she noticed Emma's thoughtful expression. The child's honesty cut straight to the heart of things adults so often danced around. "He says the bad man marked him, but God still loves him anyway." Emma knelt beside the little girl, her heart clenching at the innocent wisdom. She gently brushed a tangle from Mary's blonde hair. "Your papa is right," she said softly. "God loves him very much, and so do you." The wooden cross felt warm against her skin as Mary smiled, a real smile for the first time since Emma had arrived. As they gathered for breakfast, Jacob's eyes met hers across the table. He looked at her with a vulnerability that transformed his scarred features from frightening to heartbreaking. And in that moment, Emma understood. Whatever had been done to him, it had left wounds that went far deeper than skin. She reached for the cross, feeling its familiar weight, and made a decision that surprised her with its fierce certainty. She would stay, not just because she had nowhere else to go, but because this broken family needed what she could give. And perhaps, just perhaps, they could all heal together. The morning sun streamed through the window, catching the cross as she touched it. It sent a tiny flash of light across the table. Jacob's scarred face softened into something that looked, for the first time, like the beginning of hope. 3 weeks passed, like pages turning in a book Emma was learning to read. Each day brought small revelations about the man who'd bought her, and the children who were slowly, carefully, beginning to trust her. Sarah taught her to milk their stubborn goat. Tom showed her the best spots to gather firewood. Little Ben started following her like a shadow. And Mary crawled into her lap each evening for stories that always ended with princesses finding their happy homes. But one morning, as Emma hung washing on a line Jacob had strung between two pine trees, she heard the sound of approaching horses. She turned to see 3 riders cresting the ridge. Their faces were hard with purpose. Their hands rested on their gun belts in a way that turned her blood to ice water. Jacob emerged from the cabin, his rifle in hand. His massive frame was tense as a drawn bowstring. The children instinctively clustered behind Emma's skirts, like chicks seeking shelter. She felt the wooden cross burning against her chest as the lead rider, a sheriff's star glinting on his vest, called out, "Jacob Brennan, you're under arrest for the murder of Clayton Hayes and the burning of his ranch." The world tilted sideways. The man who'd been nothing but gentle with her, nothing but tender with his children, transformed into something dangerous and wild, his scarred face twisted with a mix of pain and pure rage. "I told you 3 years ago," he shouted back. "I never touched Hayes or his property, and you know it." The sheriff dismounted with practiced authority. His hand was now openly resting on his pistol grip. His 2 deputies flanked him like wolves closing in on wounded prey. Emma's mind reeled. "New evidence came to light," the sheriff said, his voice carrying the finality of a death sentence. Hayes's widow found your military tags in the ashes of her barn, and she's willing to swear in court that you threatened her husband the week before he died." Emma watched in horror as Jacob's rifle slowly lowered. The fight drained out of him like water from a broken bucket. Little Mary began to cry. Sarah wrapped protective arms around her younger brothers with the fierce desperation of someone who'd already lost too much. The wooden cross felt like it was searing her skin. She stepped forward, her voice surprisingly steady. "There must be some mistake. Jacob has been here with his children every day since I arrived." But the sheriff cut her off with a dismissive wave, his eyes as cold as winter stones. "Ma'am, you're new here. You don't know what this man is capable of. But Jacob Brennan is a killer, and it's time he paid for what he's done." As the deputies moved to flank Jacob, their hands on their weapons, Emma saw something break in his storm-gray eyes. A deep resignation. The look of a man who'd been fighting accusations for so long, he no longer had the strength to protest his innocence. And she realized with a sickening, crystal clarity that everything she had just begun to build here was about to crumble into dust. The rope bit into Jacob's wrists as the sheriff bound his hands behind his back. Each pull of the hemp was a fresh tear in the new life Emma had started to weave. The 4 children stood frozen, a tableau of abandonment that would haunt her dreams forever. "Please," Emma found herself saying, stepping toward the sheriff, the wooden cross clutched in her fist. "At least let me get his coat. It's cold in the mountains at night. Surely even an accused man deserves that." But the lawman's face remained carved from stone. He shook his head, preparing to boost Jacob onto one of the extra horses. Little Mary broke from Sarah's protective embrace. She ran to her father, wrapping her tiny arms around his legs, sobbing, "Papa, don't leave us again." Emma watched Jacob's scarred face crumble with anguish. He tried to kneel despite his bound hands, whispering, "Be good for Emma, little star. She'll take care of you now." He spoke as if he already knew he would never return. The sheriff pulled Mary away with more gentleness than Emma expected, but his voice remained implacable. "Jacob Brennan, you're charged with murder in the 1st degree. You'll be held in the territorial jail until the circuit judge arrives next month." Jacob looked back at Emma. His eyes held gratitude, regret, and something that might have been love, all tangled together in a knot she couldn't begin to untie. As the horses turned to leave, carrying away the man who'd become her unexpected protector, Emma felt the wooden cross burn against her palm. She made a decision that surprised her with its fierce certainty. "Sheriff, wait," she called, running after them, her skirts tangling around her legs. "I'm coming with you. If Jacob is to be tried, he deserves someone to speak for his character, and these children deserve to know their father fought for his innocence." The sheriff reined in his horse, studying Emma with new interest. Jacob twisted in his saddle, staring at her with something approaching wonder, as if he couldn't believe anyone would choose to stand beside him in his darkest hour. "Ma'am," the sheriff said slowly, "this is a serious business. Murder trials ain't for delicate sensibilities. And this man's past is darker than you know." But Emma lifted her chin, her determination coming from some deep well she hadn't known she possessed. The wooden cross was warm and solid in her grip. "Then I'll learn about his past from him," she replied, her voice carrying across the mountain valley like a bell. "Not from gossip and accusations." Behind her, Sarah stepped forward with the same stubborn courage. "If Emma goes, we all go," she declared. "This family stays together." The sheriff looked from Emma to the children, then to Jacob's stunned face. Emma saw something shift in his expression, a flicker of respect. He nodded slowly. "All right, then. But you'll need to find your own way to town, and your own place to stay. I'm not running a charity escort." His words were a challenge, but Emma had already accepted it. They were going to save their father, no matter what it took. The wagon Jacob had cobbled together from salvaged parts groaned under the weight of their hastily packed belongings. Emma drove the borrowed mule down the mountain path toward a town she'd never seen. Sarah sat beside her with little Ben in her lap. Tom and Mary rode in the back. They were a small, desperate army on a mission to save the man who had become their anchor. The wooden cross swayed against Emma's chest with each bump and turn, a constant reminder of her mother's faith in impossible things. Ahead of them, the town of Cedar Falls spread along the valley floor like a collection of a child's blocks. They found lodging at a boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Patterson. Her sharp eyes made it clear she'd heard about Jacob's arrest and wasn't entirely pleased to be housing his purchased bride and children. But when she saw little Mary's tear-stained face, Christian charity won out, and she agreed to let them stay for 50 cents a night. That evening, Emma walked the main street, listening. Conversations died when people noticed her. She learned through whispered fragments that Jacob Brennan was either a war hero driven mad by violence or a cold-blooded killer who'd fooled everyone with his gentle facade. There was no middle ground. At the general store, she overheard two women discussing that poor girl sold to the murderer, their voices thick with pity and judgment. At the saloon, men spoke of Jacob with a grudging respect, calling him hell with a rifle and the best tracker in 3 territories, before falling silent when they spotted Emma through the window. The courthouse loomed at the end of Main Street, a monument to either justice or injustice. Emma stood on its steps as evening shadows lengthened, the wooden cross burning against her palm. She was a 16-year-old girl with no money and no connections. How could she possibly save a man the entire territory seemed determined to hang? When she returned to the boarding house, she found Sarah helping Mrs. Patterson with the dinner dishes. The boys played quietly in a corner. Mary sat by the window, staring out at the street, waiting for her father to come home. "Emma," Sarah said quietly when they were alone, "what if they hang him?" The weight of 4 lives pressed down on Emma's shoulders like stones. But the cross reminded her that sometimes faith meant acting when you had no earthly reason to hope. "Then we make sure they don't," Emma replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "Tomorrow we start learning everything we can about Clayton Hayes and what really happened the night he died. Because somewhere in this town is the truth that will set your father free." Outside, the night wind carried piano music from the saloon and the distant howl of a coyote. Inside, 5 hearts beat with the rhythm of a love too deep to surrender without a fight. Emma's investigation began before dawn. She walked the quiet streets of Cedar Falls, the wooden cross cool against her skin in the morning air. At the newspaper office, a sympathetic clerk named Timothy allowed her to read back issues about Clayton Hayes' death. The murdered rancher had been found shot twice in the chest outside his burning barn on a moonless night. There were no witnesses except his widow, who claimed to have been asleep until the flames woke her. The paper described Hayes as a pillar of the community, but Emma noticed the way Timothy's mouth tightened when he spoke the dead man's name. When she pressed gently, he revealed that Hayes had a reputation for being hard on his hired hands and had been involved in several nasty land disputes. Then he dropped the first bombshell. At the bank, Emma discovered that Hayes, despite his apparent prosperity, had been deeply in debt. And the banker, a nervous little man with ink-stained fingers, let slip that the widow Hayes had inherited a substantial life insurance policy, a policy that had allowed her to pay off all her late husband's debts and live quite comfortably. Motive. It was the first solid piece of the puzzle. Armed with this information, Emma spent the afternoon at the Hayes Ranch. She approached the house with the wooden cross hidden beneath her shawl, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was about to face the woman whose testimony could send Jacob to the gallows. Mrs. Abigail Hayes was a handsome woman in her 30s, with calculating eyes and a mouth that smiled without warmth. She served Emma tea in delicate china cups that spoke of newfound wealth. "Such a tragedy about your husband," Emma said carefully, watching the widow's face. "Yes," Mrs. Hayes interrupted smoothly, her voice rehearsed. "Poor Clayton was trying to save the horses when that monster Jacob Brennan shot him down in cold blood. I saw it all from the bedroom window." But Emma noticed how her eyes didn't meet hers, and her hands trembled slightly as she lifted her teacup. Emma gently questioned the timeline. "The newspaper said it was a moonless night," she said. "And I believe your bedroom window faces away from the barn. It must have been difficult to see clearly." The widow's composure cracked. She became defensive, insisting Emma was just a naive child who didn't understand how dangerous men like Jacob could be. As Emma prepared to leave, she noticed a photograph on the mantelpiece of Clayton Hayes with another man. When she commented on it, Mrs. Hayes quickly turned the picture face down, claiming it was just an old business associate. But not before Emma recognized the second man. She'd seen him talking quietly with Mrs. Hayes outside the courthouse just the day before. Walking back to town in the gathering dusk, Emma felt the wooden cross pulse against her chest. She knew with sudden, chilling certainty that Abigail Hayes was hiding something. Something that could either damn Jacob forever or set him free. The breakthrough came from the last person Emma expected. She was in the boarding house kitchen, helping Mrs. Patterson with the dishes, when the older woman suddenly spoke. "You know, I never did believe that story about Jacob killing Clayton Hayes," she said. "My late husband used to say that Jacob Brennan was the most honorable man he'd ever served with in the war. Honor like that doesn't just disappear." Emma's hand stilled. The wooden cross seemed to warm against her chest. "Your husband knew Jacob in the war?" Mrs. Patterson nodded, her eyes distant with memory. Her husband had been Jacob's sergeant in a cavalry unit. "Jacob saved my husband's life twice," she continued. "Once from a Comanche war party and once from a fire. He ran into a burning supply wagon to rescue the ammunition stores. That's how he got those scars on his back, you know, trying to save other men." Emma felt pieces clicking into place. Jacob had been offered a promotion, but he declined, wanting to return home to his new wife and baby daughter. The wife who had died 3 years ago, leaving him alone with 4 children, and a grief that had made him retreat from the world. Then Mrs. Patterson lowered her voice. "There's something else. My husband used to say that Clayton Hayes was court-martialed for stealing supplies and selling them to Confederate sympathizers. But his family's money kept him out of prison. He was just discharged dishonorably. The connection, the reason for the hatred." Emma's pulse quickened. She spent the rest of the afternoon at the courthouse, searching through military records until she found it. Clayton Hayes had indeed been court-martialed for theft and treason, and the officer who had testified against him was Sergeant Jacob Brennan. Armed with this revelation, Emma rushed to the jail. Jacob sat in a cell barely large enough for his massive frame, his scarred face gaunt with despair. Until he saw her approaching, hope blazing in her eyes, the wooden cross clutched in her hand like a talisman. "Jacob," she said urgently through the bars, "I know why Hayes was killed, and I know you didn't do it. Clayton Hayes was a traitor, and you were the one who exposed him." Jacob's storm-gray eyes widened with understanding as Emma explained everything. The widow's insurance money, the mysterious man in the photograph, the ranch foreman, and the convenient discovery of his military tags, planted by someone who knew his history with Hayes. "Emma," Jacob said, his voice thick with emotion. He reached through the bars to touch her face with surprising gentleness. "Even if you're right, how can we prove it? They'll hang me before we get the chance." But Emma smiled, the wooden cross warm against her palm. "We're going to set a trap," she said, "and Mrs. Hayes is going to walk right into it." The setting sun cast long shadows through the jail's single window as Emma outlined her plan. Jacob listened with growing amazement at the courage of the 16-year-old girl who had chosen to fight for him when the entire world seemed determined to see him hang. And for the first time since his arrest, he began to believe that justice might be possible after all. The plan required perfect timing and nerves of steel. Emma stood in the courthouse parlor before the circuit judge, Mrs. Hayes, the sheriff, and half the town. The wooden cross was hidden beneath her best dress. She was about to gamble everything on a desperate bluff that would either save Jacob or damn them both. "Your Honor," Emma began, her voice carrying clearly through the packed room. Sarah, Tom, Ben, and Mary watched from the front row, their faces a mixture of fear and faith. "I have evidence that will prove Jacob Brennan's innocence and reveal the true killer of Clayton Hayes." Mrs. Hayes shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Her face was a perfect mask of composure, but her hands betrayed her, twisting her wedding ring round and round. Emma reached into her reticule and withdrew a piece of paper. It was a blank sheet, but she held it as if it were the most important document in the world. "This document," Emma announced, "is a confession. It was found hidden in Clayton Hayes's barn before it burned, and it names his killer as someone with access to military records, someone who knew about the court-martial." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Emma's fingers found the wooden cross through her dress fabric. She watched Mrs. Hayes' face grow paler with each word. "Furthermore," Emma said, her voice growing stronger, "this confession explains how the killer obtained Jacob's military tags and planted them in the ashes. And it reveals that Clayton Hayes was murdered not by Jacob Brennan, but by his own business partner, a man who was helping him sell stolen military goods and who killed him when Hayes threatened to confess." Mrs. Hayes suddenly shot to her feet, her chair scraping against the wooden floor. "That's impossible," she cried out. "Clayton never had any business partner, and this girl is just—" She stopped mid-sentence. Her eyes widened in horror. She had just admitted to knowing details about her husband's business that she had never mentioned before. She had walked right into the trap. The sheriff stepped forward, his hand on his gun belt, studying Mrs. Hayes with new suspicion. Emma pressed her advantage. "The confession also mentions that the killer forced Clayton to write a letter to Jacob, luring him to the ranch that night. That's how the killer knew exactly when to strike and where to plant the evidence." Abigail Hayes's facade finally shattered. "He deserved to die," she screamed, her face twisted with rage and desperation. The truth poured out of her like poison from a lanced wound. Clayton was going to confess everything to save his own skin. He was going to leave me with nothing but debt and shame. So yes, I helped kill him. And I helped frame that mountain man because everyone already thought he was dangerous." The courtroom exploded in chaos. The sheriff moved to arrest Mrs. Hayes, but as he did, Abigail spun around and pointed a trembling finger at the man from the photograph, the ranch foreman, who was standing near the back. "It was him. It was Marcus. He planned it all. He killed Clayton, and he made me help him." In that instant, Marcus's face hardened. He drew a pistol from beneath his coat. The crowd screamed and dove for cover, but they weren't fast enough. A single shot rang out. Then, through the side door, Jacob burst into the room. A deputy had unlocked his cell when the shouting started. He moved with the speed of a grizzly bear, ignoring the gun, and slammed into Marcus before he could fire again. The pistol clattered to the floor. The fight was over in seconds. The whole sordid truth came tumbling out. Marcus had been Hayes's partner in crime. He killed Hayes, forced Abigail to help frame Jacob, and planned to take the ranch and the widow for himself. Emma barely heard the commotion. Jacob, his face radiant with joy and gratitude, swept her into his arms. "You saved us all, my brave girl," he whispered against her hair. "You saved us all." Later, as the sun set over Cedar Falls, the Brennan family prepared to return to their mountain home. Emma stood with Jacob outside the courthouse while the four children played nearby, their laughter echoing in the quiet street. The wooden cross was warm against her chest. Jacob took her hands in his scarred ones. "Emma," he said, his voice soft, "I bought you for $40. But you've given me back my life, my children's future, and something I never thought I'd find again. Love." She looked up into his storm-gray eyes. She saw not the scarred mountain man who had purchased a frightened girl, but the honorable soldier, the devoted father, and the gentle giant who had taught her that the most broken people are often capable of the most beautiful love. He bent to kiss her beneath the stars that watched over their mountain valley. And Emma knew that what had begun as a transaction born of desperation had transformed into something far more precious. A love so pure and strong it could heal any wound, overcome any obstacle, and turn $40 into a fortune beyond measure. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of courage and redemption. Now, let me ask you this. When everything seems lost, would you have the strength to fight for the truth, even if the whole world was against you? Let us know in the comments below.